Hi, Jeremy here, Damn Good Doctors Club. Today we're going to look at a theme that I don't think really anybody's talking about very much, but it's important. It's really important, and especially because nobody's talking about it. And it's something that unifies the deepest lows, for example, like burnout, overwhelm, just not feeling it, right? Versus like the other end of that, where we're successful, where we're developing our software mentally, where we have a very clean way of thinking. And while these two states seem like they're kind of opposites, and in a lot of ways, they are opposites. Like it's very difficult to be burned out and inspired, right, at the same time. It's very, very difficult. But the thing they have in common, oftentimes, is loneliness and isolation. And this is important to realize that no matter how good you get, and in fact, the counterintuitive thing is the better you get at things, the more lonely it's going to be. And this is something that, maybe you felt this, maybe you haven't felt it yet, but I want to be a voice here because on one end of it we've got burnout, right? Where things, and there's different reasons for burnout, right? But things aren't going in a way that basically like nourishes you. And you know that there's a lot that goes into this, right? It's multifaceted. It's not like there's just one problem. But in general, you want to make sure that your personal cultivation, clinical certainty, right? As those things get more advanced and developed, your job gets a lot easier. And then if you have the right fractal systems around everything, then that gives you a way to deliver your work without falling into needless, unnecessary, soul-sucking bullshit, right? Which is one of many burnout pathways. So we need to know that when that happens, right? Usually we don't have the right systems in place, or we're not aligned to the right group of people. Maybe your niche is a little off, like you're kind of helping people that you don't resonate with, whatever. There's a lot of reasons. I'm not going to get into diagnosing burnout in this video. But what I want to say here is that oftentimes with burnout, we can get very lonely and we can feel trapped and we can feel like we're kind of staring down a tunnel, right? Like a dark tunnel that maybe has no end. And things can get pretty dismal. And it's normal, right? And not healthy, but normal to feel kind of alone in that. Even though there's a lot of people, especially high functioning professionals, that fall into this trap through no fault of their own. This is one of the reasons, one of the things motivating me with this whole project, right, is to try to find ways to prevent that from ever happening, right? If you're one of those people who's never had burnout, and you're like, what is he talking about? Well, good. I would love to keep you in that protected space, but you're going to have to fortify your castle very correctly with a lot of forethought in order to prevent that from happening. Always prevention is better than treatment, right? We know this. Like an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure, right? It's like a old saying, maybe Ben Franklin or somebody like that, gave that out in their infinite wisdom, right? But we have these kinds of things that we know, like it's better to prevent things than to have to dig yourself out. So with burnout, it's better to never hit it. Way better. Most of us, though, if we're seasoned enough, we felt it. You felt those dips, right? You felt those times when morale's a little low and it's like, I need a break, right? For me, my first time really with burnout was I was still a student. I hadn't even entered professional practice yet and I was burning out. So that's a story for another day, but it was pretty profound that early in my career trajectory. It was a wake-up call that I would need to have ambitions lined up with my personal values and principles, and I would need to have the right fractal systems around that so that I could actually deliver my work without burning out. But what often happens is we get lonely, okay? The world shrinks down and it's like, you stop getting joy from the places like work and patience and things like that you used to get joy from. And then also you find that maybe the people around you don't understand things as well as you would hope because they're not in your situation. So people can empathize. And this is a video, you might want to watch this with, or rewatch this with, if you have a spouse or significant other, or anybody in your life that's a very strong force, right? If you're not married, you don't have a spouse, maybe you've got a partner or somebody that, that you spend a lot of time with. And this may be actually really helpful for them too, so they can understand better what's going on with you. Because the paradox here is not just the burnout, but also the success problems. We're going to get to that in just a minute. But in general, if you're having burnout and your partner or your normal support system people haven't experienced that, they're not necessarily going to understand some of the quirks of what's going on with you. Your mood may not make like logical sense to them, and that's okay. It's all right. you're going to go through a process where you're reevaluating. And a lot of times burnout is exactly that's a wake-up call where you have to think about what led you there and basically how to, not just how to get back on track, but how to get back onto a different track that isn't going to lead back to that same position again, right? I mean, it's like if there's cycles, all of nature, all of the universe runs on cycles, cyclical motion. The seasons change, spring, summer, fall, winter, right? Like things move in cycles. The day moves in cycles. Our lives move in these cycles and subcycles. And we need to make sure that we're not just just jumping back onto the same horse track, right? And even dressed in different clothes. So for example, I wasn't going to get into all this on this video, but a lot of times people with brick and mortar practice, they want to move online and they think that's going to save them from burnout, which I was the king of this, right? Back in the day. I thought that was the move. But what many, many people don't understand, and a lot of times you have to be kind of battle tested and earn the experience here. I'm giving you these distinctions ahead of time, right? I'm trying to save you the trouble that I went through and that many people still go through to learn these lessons. But oftentimes just taking your brick and mortar practice business model and then making it into an online clone of the same model, it just moves your headaches from the real world into the virtual world. It's the same path. It just is shinier and newer, but it comes with new frustrations, new learning curves, technological issues, things like that. But it can be great in a lot of ways. But if you try to copy your brick and mortar business model, which is very linear, time for money, fee for service, and you just digitize that, yes, you've expanded your reach, but you're on the same, if the brick and mortar was going to burn you out, so will the online. So you have to do online work in a way that actually takes advantage of the nature of online businesses. And there's a lot of things people don't understand about non-linearity and complex adaptive systems in terms of how you can show up and really leverage your brain and leverage your presence and find ways to solve a problem once really well, and then know that you can impact many, 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 many people with, like as Naval Ravikant calls it, a zero to low cost of replication. So I'm not going to get into all this. We'll do more of this in the vault here. That I'm going to be expanding on these ideas. But the general thing is when you feel lonely and burned out and you're in that kind of pit, and then you're looking at how to dig yourself out of that, just make absolutely certain that you're not just digging yourself out of it only to fall into it again. We need to break some cycles here. And oftentimes that involves a shift from linear thinking to nonlinear thinking, from single modal thinking to multimodal thinking, which this is stuff that we can dive into in the vault. Ask me in the group if you have more questions on this, and you can bet this is in the Damn Good program where we break all this stuff down extensively because there's a lot to cover. It's a whole paradigm shift. People aren't good. Humans, we're not very good at nonlinear thinking. We're just not. We're very good at linear thinking. And what does linear thinking mean? Well, it means if I work 10 times as hard, then I should make 10 times as much money. Right? We understand this kind of process. If I think, okay, I've got an employee and they're adding $50,000 of revenue into my clinic. If I hire another one, then that employee will add another $50,000. And for every employee I add, right, things will go up in a linear fashion like this. Right? We're good at that. Conceptually, it makes sense. But there's also non-linearities like diminishing returns. So the second employee you add only brings in an extra $30,000. And then the third employee only brings another $10,000, right? And it's kind of arcing up like this. These are more natural phenomena. And there's also exponential curves where that third employee brings in $150,000 and the fourth employee brings in $300,000, right? And you're getting this, right? A lot harder to achieve in brick and mortar. If you can show me that third employee that makes you go exponential, please, I would love to know about it. But in reality, right, we can use the online world because it's built, technologically it's built to leverage these types of nonlinearities. And this is one of the ways that we can prevent burnout from coming back, right? You got to dig yourself out of the loop. So this video isn't about all the minutia of that, right? This video is really about loneliness and how even when you're at the bottom, when you're feeling burned out, you can be very lonely. And when there's these sayings like, the healthy person wants 1,000 things, right? When you're healthy, you want this, you want that. But the sick person only wants one thing, right? The sick person just wants to feel better. When you're in a pit, you just think about what else there could be, right? And you just want to get there. You just want to feel better. But what I'm going to tell you is that some of that loneliness Not everything else that comes with burnout, right? You can move through that, but the loneliness that you get with burnout also can exist on the other side of it when you're doing great. It's symmetrical. So we need to have realistic expectations. So some of us here don't have burnout, right? And some of us here aren't trying to dig out of a pit. We're just trying to climb up a mountain, right? But I want to tell you that if you're climbing up that mountain and you still feel lonely, there's nothing wrong with you. That's normal. And in fact, the higher you go on that mountain, the lonelier it's going to be. There's a lot of sayings about this, actually, aphorisms and things. There's, it's lonely at the top, people say, right? Where it's like, and a lot of times they talk about this in terms of like business competition, like, oh, I'm the top dog, it's lonely at the top and all that. But really, what tends to happen is that if you're going to become successful in that way, you have to start to become the type of person who can generate that success, which means upgrading your mental software, always working through self-sabotage, secondary gains, like knee-jerk reactions. Your intuition's probably pretty good, but it needs to get better. It needs to become more accurate. Most of us use heuristics, which are like mental shortcuts in our intuition. We have no idea we're doing it. We jump to conclusions. We have to train ourselves to think very slowly, to start to make sense of the world. And like, for example, nonlinearity is only one of those things where our models have to actually expand to reflect the reality. And only then can we integrate them into our subconscious to make these kind of intuitive decisions that are actually more accurate. You don't want to trade speed for accuracy in your thinking. At a certain point, as you're getting started, you can kind of take shortcuts just to get things done, right? But eventually you need to work your thinking out and get it to a place where you can think fast and accurately. And it comes from, boy, there's a lot. I mean, this is the stuff that we work in Evolve, we work in the program, we work in our group and having community around this, right? Summits, like these are the things we're doing. It's deep, right? It's deep work. It's a lot of work. It never ends, but you can get better at it, right? You can get much better at it and your progress will build. So you can start to recognize patterns in yourself, right? The different logical fallacies and things like that you're coming up against. And part of my job is to confront those, like bring them out in the open and say, this is where you're falling into this, this, and this. How do I know? Because I've been there on all three, right? I can't tell you stuff that like, I wouldn't ask you to do things that I haven't done, right? Especially with self-assessment. So in an effort not to be hypocritical and to have integrity, which is one of my favorite values, I'm doing the same type of work. And what happens oftentimes as you do this type of development work so that you can become the person who will generate more success, you start to change as a person. You start to change as a human. Your tastes and preferences start to change. How you want to spend your time starts to change. There are big shifts that we need to make that most of us, it's tempting to blame our culture. And I don't think that's we can't use that as the total scapegoat, but it plays a big part. We're groomed and trained to be consumers in our culture. That's the de facto from day one. Consume, consume, consume. I'm going to break some of that. Okay, one of the things you have to do is really like put a stake in the ground and go, I need to move from consumption to creation. And I remember like years ago when I had felt this, I had felt kind of subconsciously I needed to do, and I finally found the words and I realized it's consumption versus creation. And I put a stake in the ground. I even said to my wife, like, I'm less interested in consuming things. I'm more interested in making stuff. And she's like, okay, right? Which is we're gonna come back to that loneliness aspect where your partner's like, what the fuck? Where did this come from? What are you even talking about, right? But what's interesting is like, you get to a point where just making that distinction, you will become a different person where that starts to shift and you start to think more about output than input. So I'll give you a little tip. And this is a small tip, but it can be very important for you and it can make a big difference. Many of us, especially smart people that like to learn, we love ideas. And I warn about intellectual entertainment, mental masturbation, right? Just this isn't going to be some circle jerk where it's just idea land with no actual application on reality, right? And I warn about that because we need to be grounded and balanced. We need to have a head, we need to have a heart, and we need to have hands, right? We need to use all these things. We need to actually implement what we're doing. Otherwise, we're just like in a bubble somewhere, right? But a lot of times we get addicted to the intellectual growth. And our brains are like a muscle, right? And our brains get good at learning certain things. And we just want to consume, right? Which is fine, which is like what you're doing now. You're taking in information, right? I'm sharing this with you. You're taking it and consuming it, crunching it down, distilling it, trying to fit it into other things you know, right? Expanding your context and your schema, which is good. But a lot of times we get enough dopamine from that we neglect our other work. So while we're busy loading our brains up with all these books and everything else, where's the output? And I'll give you one simple little rule of thumb that you can use, if you'd like, is to look at your day and to say, okay, here's what happens. At night, we know this, right? Our brain is taking all the information we've learned that day and synthesizing it, trying to find context. That's where dreams come from for the most part. It'll be an old memory plus some brand new thing. And it's this weird dream because nothing makes sense, right? It's the kid you went to elementary school with, and you're talking about the lunch you had today for the first time, right? It's a weird mix of things, but your brain's trying to manage all the information, trying to contextualize stuff. But when we go to sleep, that's what's happening. Information's getting distilled, right? And when we wake up, that process hopefully, has pretty much completed. And so we've integrated things. And there are studies where people are learning skills, like they have them push buttons and stuff. I've noticed this with even things like playing guitar, right? If you try to learn a new song and you're doing this detailed finger work, and especially if it's difficult, right? Or they teach people like on a keyboard, they give them button patterns to press, and they make them learn these really hard patterns. You can't do it really well. And then you go to sleep, and when you wake up in the morning, you'll be able to perform that music or do the button thing like way better. It's pretty consistent. We take new information, we consolidate it at night while we're sleeping, and in the morning we have it, we own it more, it's ours. Okay? So what I would offer you is to consider structuring your day in terms of this is your brain, right? And when you go to sleep, your brain is filling up with ideas and context, and you're getting smarter. And when you wake up for the first half of the day, that's creation time. That's output time. That's taking some information from your cup and putting it into the world. What does that look like for you? Maybe it's writing an article. Maybe it's creating a video training module. Maybe you're working on a book. Whatever it is. Output time. Output comes first. Creativity. You have to empty some of that cup, right? And then once you've kind of unloaded that and you've made what you're going to make, you've done your part to release and create, right? Outward movement. Then, now you've got some space, go read the book. Watch the videos, do the research, right? Take in information after. So when you wake up, empty first, and then fill, and then go to sleep. And then it'll loop again, and then you got the next day. This is a really important habit because it helps us break the pattern of addiction to learning, right? And intellectual entertainment and all that. And it forces us to start to become more and more creative. This is one of the personality changes. I got onto a wicked tangent here. I mean, really, I want to talk about loneliness, but that's one of the personality changes that you need to do in order to start to become abnormal. You want to become abnormal. If you want abnormal results, you cannot be normal. Normal in our culture, consume. Binge that shit. Netflix all day, right? When you start, and I'm not gonna, it's not a judgment, right? But it's very interesting once you make that shift and then you start to look around and you never realized, like a fish in water, right? You never realized you were in it until you're not. Until you look around and go, wow, I took a walk this morning, right? And as I walked through my neighborhood, I could just see people's lights of their TVs on through their windows. They're watching daytime TV, right? Consumer, consumer, consumer. It's not a judgment. It's not a put down, right? We need to be like non-emotional with this. It's just surgical fact. And this gets into the loneliness piece, right? Because becoming more of a creator and balancing your consumption is one of many, many personality shifts that need to happen so that you can start to get higher up in your personal cultivation and to use your fractal systems and to become the kind of person that is abnormal, that can create a world and draw people in, right? It's pretty amazing to be able to do that. But you have to create the world, right? So that's one thing. I mean, we have a lot of other stuff like looking at your own biases and trying to figure out your relationship to pain motivation, pleasure motivation, like where you are on that spectrum. There's a lot of stuff like that. What kind of learner you are, how your own brain works, so that you're not too biased, right? You want to repel the people that you want to repel, but you don't want to be repelling people on accident, right? So we just need to make sure that our own biases aren't bleeding all over everything we're doing. And there's a lot of personal growth that comes with that. There's a lot of the ability to sit back, right? And observe yourself from a third person perspective. non-judgmentally, your self-talk, right? There's a lot of changes that have to happen with your self-talk. You have to love yourself, right, in different ways. But all these changes, all these things that will help you become abnormal, right, abnormally successful, also come with the double-edged sword of they make you abnormal, meaning there's less and less people who can think like you can think. There are less and less people who have made those same types of decisions. There are less and less people who just straight up understand you or get you. So you may have spouse, partner, that kind of thing, where you're both on like a very long-term development journey, right? You're both trying to improve yourselves. You're developing language. You've got mental models around things. I found very, very early on when my wife and I first started dating, like 10 years ago at this point, one of the best things we did was we started to create communication strategies where we started to name things. We started to create mental models, like immediately. And then we could refer back to them. And then when there was any kind of miscommunication, we could use our models and figure out what was going on. And then we could, we didn't have to fight all the time, right? We didn't have to have this long-term drift where over time two people don't understand each other anymore. And you wake up after 10 years or 20 years or whatever, and there's a stranger in your house, right? Because relationships, like anything else, there's built-in entropy. These systems want to become random, right? And you want to be in a relationship with somebody who's growing, right? Not stagnant. But you also don't want to be in a relationship where you're both of you are growing and you're just growing apart, right? But if you're growing into yourself, you're becoming more and more yourself, and so is your partner, and you're developing language, right, to keep up with that, there's less chance for loneliness. So why am I bringing this up, right? It's tough at the top. It's lonely at the top. Well, because there are two strategies for this, managing this, the loneliness at the top. And one of them is to go up to the top of the mountain, right, as far as you can, right? Evolve yourself as high as you can, do as well as you can, and then just know that for most of your social interactions, most of your support network, right, most of your day-to-day things, you're going to have to come down from that mountain because most people can't go up there with you and they don't understand. And this isn't a put down or anything like that. It's literally just about development and sophisticated language. And if people haven't learned the language of themselves to that point, they won't understand what you're saying. You'll talk past each other. It just happens. And that's okay. You can still be compassionate, you can still connect, you can still love people, and you can also know that there are people who have gone higher than you will that are saying stuff that's going over your head, right? Like there's people I'm like, wow, that's inspiring, But you also start to realize when that's happening, and then you can kind of use that to anchor and create more growth. But again, your first option is to go up as high as you can, right? Feel the loneliness at the top and just know that in social interactions, there's probably not a lot of people that are going to be able to relate with the whole you. There's a lot of shit you've got to just kind of take and just keep to the side because it can be misunderstood. People don't want to feel different, right? People don't want to feel that especially if you haven't done a lot of work on this, you'll feel judged and all that. Like if somebody starts saying things that you don't understand, you would feel judged and you'd feel less and whatever, right? And that's how people feel if you start talking over their heads. So you have to, I don't want to say dumb it down, but like there are parts of you that you just can't share. The more you develop yourself, there's more stuff you have to kind of set aside and wait for the right people to bring that out. And that can be really hard and it can be really lonely. And so if your spouse is watching this or your partner, significant other, right? This is something that I think is important for the both of you to start kind of talking about if you're not already, and to have some language, because you might find, for example, here's one place, right, of this stuff comes out in funny ways, but you decide, okay, boom, I want to be a creator more. I'm done with consuming stuff. I don't want to watch more movies. I don't want to, just be cruising YouTube, and I don't want to be doing research for research's sake all day. I'm making this thing about input and output, and I'm going to start asymmetrically leaning towards output, right? But why would your spouse, partner, or significant other, why would they make the exact same decision on the same day as you? Like they're probably not, they don't have the same motivations, right? They're not in this world where this is all we talk about and the things that we do and whatever. And you can't expect them to make the same decision. Just like if one day you woke up and said, okay, I'm going to be full keto. That's all I'm going to eat is just only keto. And you can't expect your spouse or your family or whoever to all be like, yeah, we all decided that too today, right? There's going to be a little bit of difference right, in the way that the house runs. And it has to be just respectful. So you want to respect, of course, your own decision, but you also want to respect your spouse, not making them have to do the same thing you're doing. And because what can happen is you can start to go, well, I'm a creator now, right? So you feel this kind of status boost, and then you see your spouse still kind of like flipping through, watching a lot of movies, just like you used to do a week ago. And now you're kind of looking down at them and going, hey, you should be a leader too. Why aren't you, well, don't do that. Okay. It's a different path, but you can have awareness around it. You can have discussion around it. You can be interested in each other. You can have compassion, right? But don't fight. Don't fight about it because one person has decided to become a creator today, right? And then somebody else in your family or that you're close to or that reflects upon you hasn't. It's normal. And you might feel a little bit lonely. This stuff's important. It's real. It exists. But we need to talk about it so you can manage it. So if that's happening, spouse, significant other, like whoever's watching this, like I want you to understand why these changes are happening, because the person who's in this club, right, and is like going through this process, that person is changing for reasons, for very specific reasons. And while you're welcome to look through the vault and stuff like that, I don't expect that the spouse, the partner, significant other is going to totally understand everything that we're doing here and why, unless they're in it too. If you have two people that are like physicians, right, that are in the healthcare field, that are both married together, that they would get it in a different way than, for example, if, one person was like in finance or banking, right, and then the other spouse is like a, osteopath or something, functional medicine, right? It's just a little bit different. Just a little bit. It's kind of like people who are extreme athletes, right? Like marathon runners and things like that. The spouse has to kind of, either they're in it together and they both do it and they just like get it, or they know that they're a little bit different and they just respect the motivations, right? You just respect it. So as you notice changes, right, as your spouse, partner, significant other, right, is going through this kind of process here with me, and they're starting to maybe seem a little more distant, a little more aloof, a little more like psychological and a little more kind of considered, where they're starting to analyze a lot of things like, why did I react that way? Why did I say that? You're probably going to notice their language patterns changing. It's all normal. Okay. So while we have the physician, right, the damn good doctor going up this development arc and getting a little bit lonelier, what also tends to happen is the spouse can get a little bit lonelier too. And this is normal, especially too, if one person in a relationship is doing this massive personal growth spike and the other one isn't, and especially if they're interested in personal growth, they look and they go, hey, what the hell? What are you up to? What are you doing? I want to feel that kind of growth too, right? And then there can be like a little bit of jealousy, a little bit of competition, a little bit of feeling left out. So just talk about it. Just talk about it. I've talked to my wife about a lot of these things. I say, how do you feel about not just the money that I invest in mentorship and learning and things like that, but also the time, right? Like I spend a lot of money and time working on my brain and all these things and, trying to make sure I'm around the right kinds of people and cultivating this mindset, refining my systems, all these things. I said, how do you feel about that? And she said, it's pretty good. I don't get in your face about it, right? Because I just figure that when I want to do things for my own self, that you won't get in my face about it either. And we have kind of like an unspoken deal, right? So she's like, I respect it. Like, invest whatever you want, time, money, whatever. It's doing great. You seem happier as a person. You're more developed. You're more centered. You're easier to be around, right? Not such a dick. Sure, that was me. Still am occasionally, but I'm getting better. But at the same time, she lets me have that, right? Because she trusts me. But then she also knows that I trust her to do her own things and develop herself her own way. And that seems to work. Because when you have two people that both want to improve themselves, sometimes we get focused on the short term and one person's doing a lot and feeling these big leaps, going, holy shit, epiphany, 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 I'm a different person. And the other one goes, hey, what happened to me? Right? So these are all little recipes for loneliness. And I talked about loneliness during burnout, right? When you're at the bottom, that's kind of obvious. But loneliness when you're succeeding, that's a whole different deal and nobody talks about it. But it's important, you got to know it. So your one strategy is to come down from the mountain, right? And just know that like you may have to dumb things down. There are parts of yourself you can't share with everybody. And that's just it. That's just the deal. But the second strategy is to cultivate relationships with other people. When you start kind of sticking your head up and you see there's, only a few other folks that have their head up the same way and see the same things you see, connect with them. This will become the strongest thing. This social group, this cohesion, the ability to know that you have friends, colleagues, right? There's camaraderie there with people that get it. To be honest with you, that's one of the reasons that I've created this whole world, right? It's because I don't get to talk to a lot of people that get it. So I have to bring people up, bring people in, say, okay, we're going to look at these mental models. We got to refine our thinking. Here's some fractal systems. Here's some personal cultivation. Here's where you're getting stuck. I've been stuck there too. There's a way out of it. I found it. It's great. Try this. Here's the other thing that, most people try XYZ approach. There's going to be some missing pieces, and I know it's really counterintuitive, but having done that and failed, I know that we need to do this instead. And all of a sudden, we've created a culture, right? And it's not just selfish for me, so I don't have to be lonely all the time, right? So that I can have adult conversations with people who are ambitious and at the top of their game, right? Or at least getting there. People who are aimed with a growth mindset, right? Those are the more rewarding. I don't want to waste my time talking to people that don't want to grow, right? But it's better to have a culture with that, right? It's not just so that I can have people to talk to, obviously, right? When you start changing these things in your life and implementing the ideas, the distinctions, the insights into your personal and professional life, you will get massive changes. You can't not. It's bespoke. It comes from you. It's emergent. You'll see it everywhere. I know I have. And my wife has too. When I ask her, man, she's got a lot to say. So don't be afraid of the loneliness. All right? It will come. It will come for you. But I've built in mechanisms, not just so I can have people to talk to, but so that you can have people to talk to within this group. It doesn't have to be me. Get a buddy, right? If somebody in the group is, you resonate with them, reach out, connect with them. It would be awesome if you had a call once a week for an hour and you with no specific agenda, but you're just talking about, okay, here's where I am, here's what I'm working on, here's what I'm getting stuck. Oh yeah, here's where I am. And you can support each other. You can find different angles of things. It's like one of the best gifts I can give you is to start connecting you with other people within this network, within the DGDC that are on the same page. And we're all fractally aligned because look at the material that we talk about in here. Right? There is a North Star guiding this community. So leverage that, okay? Make friends, reach out. I don't want you to be lonely, right? But I am. It's like a duty, right? To take you through a process of growth that there will be some loneliness that comes as a byproduct. And I've thought of that, I've accounted for it, I've experienced it. And we've created a world around it so you don't have to be alone if you don't want to. You can reach out. There are others here who get it. And of course, your spouse, your partner, significant other, keep them in the loop, don't keep them in the dark. Even though they might be a little bit bored about hearing about heuristics and mental models and, whatever else. What'd that guy with the beard say about, base rate fallacy? Oh yeah, fascinating, right? Well, there's, there's some nuance that, not everybody's going to necessarily care about, but just the fact that you're including your significant other in your growth, right? That's what it's really about, is including and doing it together. All right, so I hope that you're not super lonely on this journey, but if you are a little bit, that's to be expected. And it's better to go up the mountain and come down a little bit than to never go up at all. All right, cheers.